Hey everybody, and welcome to Chapter 3. We're talking about central tendency, we're talking about spread, and now we are going to learn how to calculate those things in JASP, and it is actually probably easier than you might expect it to be. It's very straightforward, and is very similar to what you've been doing all semester so far. So let's take a look. I'm going to open up a familiar data set, so I'm going to open up the Chapter 2 JASP activity. So you already have this. This data is the country happiness ratings, right? So we have the score right here, which is happiness, and so all these are ordered by happiness rating. So we see that the number 1 happiest country is Finland, the number 2 is Denmark, and the number 3 is Norway. And if we scroll down all the way to the bottom, we can see that the least happiest countries are South Sudan, the Central African Republic, and Afghanistan. Those are the least happiest countries on the country. You can see that the U.S. is ranked at 19, which is respectable, I feel like. But it looks like we're just a little bit more happier than Mexico, a little bit happier than France, but we're not quite as happy as Belgium, Germany, or Ireland, or Costa Rica, or Canada, or those other countries. All right. So how do we look at this stuff now? In the in the lecture videos, we did some of that stuff by hand. There's no way that you're going to get me to calculate this stuff by hand. This is 156 values. No, thank you. So we're going to be able to use JASP to calculate this stuff very quickly. So we can go to descriptives like we have in the previous JASP examples, and we're going to go down the list to look at whatever it is that we need to analyze. Some of these are not going to make sense, right? So overall rank is not going to make sense if we analyze it, because that is an order variable where we're just, not an ordinal variable, but just an order variable letting you know which values are in front of others. So that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to analyze. Neither does country or region, because these are text values, and you can't get a mean of a text value. You can't add and divide text. But we can with score. So let's check out the score. So looking here in our results, if you're following along with your own data set, you can see that we have the mean, which is 5.4. We got standard deviation, which is 1.1, the minimum and the maximum. Cool. So this gives us a fair amount of information about our data set. The first thing that I want to do, I want to look see where the U.S. Stands to the international average. So 5.4, I'm going to toggle over back to our data by clicking this spot, this left-hand pane right here. So we got 5.4, and we can see that, oh yeah, we are above average. So 6.892 is quite a bit higher above 5.4. And we can actually scroll down to see where 5.402 lands, and that is between the Dominican Republic and Bosnia and Herzegovina. So between those two is where the mean happiness rating, so the average international happiness, is between these people. So if you're as happy as someone from Hong Kong or Turkey or Bosnia or Dominican Republic, then you're about as happy as most people on average. All right, so now we can go back over and look at this one more time. We got the standard deviation, so that tells us the average kind of distance from the mean that these values are. So it's a pretty small number, right? So we have a lot of values hanging around this mean right here, which is probably what we can expect, because this seems to follow mostly a normal distribution, as you may have found in the previous activity. All right, so we have all this, which is cool, but we can really start cooking with gas whenever we go to statistics. If we go to statistics, we see, oh man, this just makes me so excited and so happy to see all these different options that we can use to analyze our data. So let's say that we don't like the mean, we can take that out, and we can throw in the median. Median, gang, rise up. So in the median, we see it's actually pretty close, right? It's actually pretty close to the mean, which makes sense if we think that our data is normal. it follows that normal distribution, then these values should be very similar, and that is what we find. So the mean 5.4, the median is 5.38. You round that up to 5.4 as well. And then we have the mode, which is 5.2, so it means that that's the most common score. And if we go back and we look at 5.2, what was it, 5.208? Yeah. So we have only 2 countries that share that, and that's Morocco and Azerbaijan. So they're the only 2 countries internationally that have the same happiness ranking. So the people that are in Morocco are just as happy as the people, or as unhappy as the people in Azerbaijan, because this is below average, right? Or below the mean. All right, so that tells us a lot. Let's take a look at some of the other things. So the sum, we don't really need that too much. You know, that doesn't really tell us that much about our data, so that's fine. So we got all that. But now let's look at over here in the bottom left, we have what's called dispersion. That is a very fancy way of saying spread. So we can look at some of these things. Some of these things we already know, right? We already know what variance is. You click that, it adds the variance score, and as you might expect, and you can test this out yourself, if you take the variance score and you get the square root of it, what do you get? You get the standard deviation. What happens if you take the standard deviation and you multiply it by itself? Then you are going to get the variance. So these values are very similar, and generally the more normal your data set is and the bigger the sample size is, the closer these 2 values get to one another. That's not always true, but it's usually true. So these pretty similar. So that's cool. That's interesting. We can look at the range. We don't even have to click this though, because we can easily calculate it by subtracting the minimum from the maximum, which would give us 4.916. Okay, that's cool. And we have the IQR. We remember the IQR, right? So the IQR, the interquartile range, is 1.64, which is also a way of looking at spread. So it's looking at that center, the center. What's it called? The center part of our distribution, and how much variability there is there. The standard, so we're not going to talk about some MAD, we're not going to talk about MAD robust, but we will be talking in future chapters about the standard error of the mean. It is right here, and it's not to go into too much detail, but it's kind of like looking at a population of standard deviations, which that's a lot to think about. We'll get to it later, so I'm going to disable it for now. All right, so the other thing that I think is kind of interesting is here we can organize in the quartiles as well. And so it gives us the 25th, 50th, and 75th percentile. And we already know the 50th percentile because that's just the mean, right? But we have these others, right? So 4.54 is the 25th percentile, and 6.18 is the 75th percentile. And we know if we subtract 25th percentile from the 75th, that's going to give us the IQR. All right, so this is just for score. Obviously, we can, if we wanted to, we could go hog wild and we could like plug all these in. So let's just plug all those in case you don't know how to do that, to make it simple for you. I'm using a PC, but you can just click on this score, go down to the bottom, or go down to wherever you want to highlight, and hold down Shift and click, and it highlights all of those. So we can add all those in, and wham! Look how much data we have. This is so exciting. We got so much data that we can look at if we wanted to. Excuse me. So we got all this stuff if we wanted to, a wealth of data to look at. But you know, one of the things that I want to practice is using the split function, because that's going to be really important, I think, for organizing and analyzing our data. So I'm going to move all this back over, and I'm actually going to edit our data on the fly, which we haven't done in one of these tutorials yet. But we're going to do it right now. So if you want to manipulate this data on your own, all you got to do is double click on it, and it brings up this data. So if we wanted to, we can arrange this data right now, and I'm going to do that by creating a group, and I'm going to create essentially kind of like the top half versus the bottom half. So how many? What do we have? 156. So 78-ish, right? So yeah. So I'll put that is all going to be the label 1, and then all this down here is going to be the label 2. Oops. And so ultimately, kind of what I'm doing here is I'm splitting the data up so that, just so you're following what I'm doing, that the first half up here, the first half of all these scores are represented with this group that I made called Group 1, and then the bottom half is Group 2. So with JASP, if you have all this and you're ready to go, you can just hit save whenever you exit. I'm actually going to save this as something so that way I don't overwrite the original data file. Okay. All right. So, oh, that didn't split it for us, did it? 1 second. Why didn't it do it? All right. I apologize for that. Let's try one more time. Actually, I know what it is. I know why it's doing this. So I'm going to open up the file that I just made. All right, so there we go. All right, so I'm going to exit out of this one. Okay, so now you see what I mean when I was like creating this group. So that's cool. It wasn't as smooth as the transition as I was hoping for, but that's fine. Science is all about the road bumps, or the roadblocks, whatever, speed bumps. Okay, so now we can split this data in a way that makes sense. So we can do that by taking a group and adding it over to split. So we're going to be splitting the data between the top half and the bottom half. So if I wanted to look at the score now I can see in the score we have the top half, the average or the mean is 6.3, and the bottom half is 4.5. So that's kind of cool. But I'm kind of interested in looking at whether or not these other things might influence our happiness score. So we have organized this by the happiness score, right? We split it up between the happy countries and the unhappy countries. So let's take a look at generosity, for example, or actually perceptions of corruption. So how much do people in your country think that there is corruption afoot? And what we can see here is that for happy countries, that this is actually surprising to me, that for happy countries it seems like that overall people think that there is more corruption than unhappy countries. For unhappy countries, they don't really seem to think. Just eyeballing the data and looking at it as 0.135 versus 0.087. We can do the same thing with generosity. So looking at generosity, we see kind of the same thing, right? So 0.183 versus 0.186. Or if we wanted to look at healthy life expectancy, this is where we do see a big difference, where the happier countries seem to expect a longer life and a healthier life than the people that were in unhappy countries. Let's take a look at social support. I'm just kind of interested in this stuff, right now. Here again, we see that the happier countries have more social support, not just their families, but their government systems as well, versus the unhappy countries. And for GDP, we see the same thing, that the countries that have more economic growth are happier than the ones that do not, that have less economic growth. So, and again, if we wanted to, we could get wild with with all these different things. We could look at if we suspected that any of these were skewed, we could look at the median to try to get the central idea. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward, and a lot of stuff is kind of obvious. But play around with the split settings, especially if you have groups in your data or conditions in your data, because oftentimes that's kind of where the interesting story lies. All right, so thanks so much for tuning in, and if you have any questions about JASP, just let me know.